Picture a company so massive that 1 in every 3 American families shopped there every single year. A company that built the tallest building on planet Earth just to house its own headquarters. A company that didn't just sell you a refrigerator, it sold you your car insurance, your credit card, your tools, and even, at one point, a house you could order straight from a catalog and build yourself. At its peak, Sears generated more than $50 billion a year, operated thousands of stores across 3 countries, and stood as the single largest retailer on the face of the earth. But just a few decades later, bankrupt, boarded up. A ghost of a name most people under 30 only recognize from an empty box in a dead mall. How does the biggest retailer in the world simply disappear? That's what we're unpacking today. In this video, I'm going to walk you through exactly how Sears rose from a tiny mail-order watch business to the most powerful retail empire America has ever seen, and exactly how, piece by piece, it let that empire slip through its fingers. We'll look at the strategic mistakes, the ignored warning signs, and the one man whose name is now permanently tied to the company's downfall. And if you stick around to the end, I'll show you something almost nobody expects. The building that once defined American ambition, the tallest skyscraper in the world, doesn't even carry the Sears name anymore. What happened to it might be the most symbolic detail in this entire story. Let's get into it. Sears wasn't built by some Wall Street financier chasing a trend. It was built on a simple, almost accidental idea: sell things directly to people who had no way to get them. In the late 1800s, rural America was starving for access. If you lived on a farm in Nebraska or Kansas, the big city store might be 100 miles away, and even if you made the trip, local shopkeepers could charge whatever they wanted because there was no competition in town. Farmers were, quite literally, a captive market. Sears did the opposite of everyone else. Instead of building more stores in cities where retail competition was already fierce, the company went straight to the people who had the least access and the most demand. A catalog, delivered by mail, filled with everything from watches to farm equipment to entire mail-order houses you could build with your own hands. The timing was perfect. The railroad network was expanding. Rural postal delivery was becoming reliable. And the American middle class was growing fast enough to actually afford these goods on credit. People were hungry for this. For the first time, a family in the middle of nowhere could get the exact same products, at the exact same prices, as someone living in Chicago. That single idea, fairness and access through the mail, is what turned a small watch and jewelry operation into a national institution almost overnight. By the time the 20th century rolled around, Sears wasn't just a catalog company. It was becoming something bigger. A symbol that no matter where you lived in America, you could still be plugged into modern consumer life. Here's where things really start to explode. In 1925, Sears made a move that changed everything. It opened its first physical retail store in Chicago, shifting from a pure mail-order business into brick-and-mortar retail. And the timing lined up with a cultural revolution: the rise of the automobile. Suddenly, Americans could drive further, shop more often, and browse in person instead of waiting weeks for a catalog order to arrive. Sears didn't fight the shift. It leaned all the way into it. The company strategically planted stores in the suburban shopping districts where the growing American middle class actually lived, rather than clustering downtown like older department stores. This gave Sears a business model advantage almost nobody else had. It could scale physical retail while still leaning on its catalog infrastructure. 2 engines, 1 company. Then came the Great Depression, the moment that should have crushed a company this size. Instead, Sears thrived because it offered something desperate families needed: affordable products and installment payment plans. While competitors folded, Sears expanded. And then it did something even smarter: it built its own products. Instead of relying on outside manufacturers, Sears created private label brands that became more trusted than the national names around them. Kenmore for appliances, Craftsman for tools, Die Hard for batteries, Weatherbeater for paint. Craftsman tools came with something revolutionary for the time: a lifetime warranty. Kenmore refrigerators and washing machines became some of the best-selling home appliances in the entire country. These weren't just products. They were reasons to trust Sears over anyone else. Then, in 1931, Sears launched Allstate to sell automobile tires. By 1934, that same Allstate brand had expanded into auto insurance, eventually spinning off into one of the largest insurance companies in America. Sears wasn't just selling things anymore. It was building entire industries out of its own retail floor. This allowed Sears to grow faster than anyone thought possible, not through one great product, but through an entire ecosystem of trusted brands feeding off each other. By the 1950s and 60s, Sears wasn't just a store. It was a cultural institution. America's post-war economic boom sent families flooding into new suburbs, and Sears was already there waiting for them, often as the anchor tenant in newly built shopping malls all across the country. If a mall was going up in your town, chances are Sears was the reason it existed in the first place. Customers could walk into one building and buy literally everything: clothing, furniture, appliances, tools, automotive parts, even farm equipment. Sears Auto Centers offered oil changes, tire installations, and battery replacements right next door. This was the original one-stop shop, decades before that phrase was even common. By the late 1960s, Sears had officially become the largest retailer in the United States by revenue. And then, in 1973, the company built a monument to its own dominance, the Sears Tower in Chicago, standing 1,450 feet tall, the tallest building on the entire planet. It wasn't just a headquarters. It was a statement. At its peak, Sears was pulling in more than $50 billion a year, operating thousands of stores across the US, Canada, and international markets. By the late 1970s, Sears wasn't just winning. It looked, to every outside observer, completely and permanently unbeatable. Nobody watching Sears in 1978 could have imagined what was coming. But here's the thing about empires that look unstoppable: the cracks are usually already there. They're just quiet. Sears' flaw wasn't a single bad decision. It was structural. The company had built its identity around being everything to everyone: a department store, a catalog company, a tool brand, an appliance brand, an insurance company, an auto shop, all bundled under one roof, one name, one aging business model. That worked beautifully in a world with limited competition. But it meant Sears had no specialty. It wasn't the cheapest. It wasn't the most convenient. It wasn't the most modern. It was just everywhere, doing everything reasonably well. This worked for decades. But it planted the seeds of something dangerous. The moment a competitor showed up who was better at even one of those categories, pricing, convenience, technology, Sears had no obvious answer. The discounters arrived. Throughout the 1980s, Sears began hemorrhaging market share as discount retailers like Walmart, Target, and Kmart expanded aggressively across the country. Sears simply could not compete on everyday low prices while still dragging along its full department store cost structure. The specialists arrived. Consumers didn't just want cheaper, they wanted better at specific things. Home Depot became the destination for home improvement. Best Buy became the destination for electronics. Sears, once the master of a little bit of everything, suddenly looked like the master of nothing. Distraction through diversification. Instead of doubling down on retail, Sears tried to reinvent itself as a financial powerhouse. It acquired Dean Witter Reynolds in 1981, pushing into the securities and investment business. In 1985, it launched the Discover Card, which actually became one of the biggest credit card brands in America. These moves made money, but they pulled management's attention away from the core retail business that was quietly rotting. Aging stores, aging brand. By the late 1980s, Sears locations were starting to feel tired. Customers increasingly saw Sears as old-fashioned next to sleeker, newer competitors. In 1993, Sears made a symbolic and painful decision. It ended publication of the legendary Big Book catalog after more than a century in print. quietly closing the chapter that had built the entire company in the first place. Missing the internet twice. Sears underestimated how fast shopping habits were shifting in the 1990s. While competitors invested heavily in technology and modern supply chains, Sears moved slowly. Then came the knockout blow nobody saw fully coming: the rise of Amazon and online shopping in the late 1990s and early 2000s. This is the cruelest irony in the entire story. Sears had literally invented mass-market direct-to-consumer shopping through its catalog, and yet it failed to become a serious e-commerce player when the exact same business model went digital. Each of these problems didn't happen in isolation. They stacked. Discounters ate the low end. Specialists ate the categories. Financial diversification ate management's focus. Amazon ate the future. And Sears just kept absorbing hit after hit, never delivering the one fatal blow, just a slow, compounding bleed. If there's one moment that sealed Sears' fate, it's 2005, the year hedge fund manager Eddie Lampert merged Sears with Kmart to create Sears Holdings Corporation, in a deal valued at roughly $11 billion. On paper, this looked like salvation. Analysts believed the combined company could finally have the scale to fight back against Walmart and the other giants. Two struggling retailers, joined together, might just be strong enough to survive. Instead, it became the trigger for collapse. Rather than pouring money into renovating stores or modernizing operations, Sears Holdings under Lampert focused heavily on cutting costs and squeezing short-term financial performance. Store investment dried up almost completely. This is the moment the audience, and history, quietly says, they're done. Not because of one scandal or one crash, but because the company had just handed control to a strategy built around financial engineering instead of retail reinvention. What followed was less an explosion and more a slow-motion collapse. With little reinvestment, stores became increasingly outdated and poorly maintained. Empty shelves, aging interiors, and declining customer service chipped away at a reputation built over a century. Foot traffic kept dropping. Sales fell for year after year after year. To stay afloat, Sears began selling off the very things that made it iconic. In 2017, it sold the Craftsman tool brand to Stanley Black & Decker in a deal worth roughly $900 million. Hundreds of underperforming stores closed one after another as revenue kept sliding. By the late 2010s, the largest retailer in American history had transformed into a company crushed under declining sales, heavy debt, aging stores, and competitors it could no longer keep pace with. Then, on October 15, 2018, it became official. Sears Holdings Corporation filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy after failing to make a $134 million debt payment due earlier that month. As part of the filing, the company announced plans to close more than 140 additional stores. More than 130 years after it began as a small mail-order watch business, the reign of one of America's most powerful companies was over. In January 2019, in a strange and almost poetic twist, Eddie Lampert, the very man whose decisions had accelerated the collapse, won the bankruptcy auction through his firm ESL Investments, with a bid worth about $5.2 billion. It kept Sears from being liquidated entirely, and the surviving stores were folded into a new, much smaller company, Transformco. Thousands of employees lost their jobs. Store after store shut its doors for good. Many of the buildings that once anchored American suburban life were demolished, redeveloped, or converted into offices, healthcare facilities, or space for other retailers entirely. Remember that mystery I promised you at the start? The Sears Tower, the tallest building in the world, the physical symbol of everything Sears had built, doesn't even carry the company's name anymore. It was quietly renamed Willis Tower back in 2009, years before the bankruptcy even happened, reflecting just how far Sears' corporate presence had already shrunk. And yet, most Americans still call it the Sears Tower out of habit, even though Sears hasn't owned it in years. Think about what that really means. The tallest, most literal symbol of Sears' dominance was already being erased from the skyline before the company even collapsed. the building outlived the brand's grip on it. It became a monument to a company that, in name, was already fading long before the headlines caught up. That's the quiet tragedy hiding underneath this entire story. So what's the actual lesson here? The biggest lesson from Sears isn't big companies eventually fail. It's this: being everything to everyone is not a strategy, it's a delay tactic. For 100 years, Sears' greatest strength was doing a little bit of everything under one name. But the moment specialists and low-cost competitors showed up, companies that were the best at just one thing, that broad identity stopped being an advantage and became a liability. Dominance isn't permanent. It's rented one generation of customers at a time, and the rent comes due the moment you stop adapting to how people actually want to shop. Sears didn't lose because it made one catastrophic mistake. It lost because it kept being good enough in a world that had started rewarding the best at one specific thing. Sears pioneered mail-order shopping, built brands that are still trusted today, and helped define what a modern department store even was. It changed how an entire country shopped, long before Amazon, long before Walmart, long before any of today's retail giants existed. But in the end, it couldn't out-adapt the very future it helped create. So here's my question for you. Was Sears' collapse truly inevitable, a company simply outrun by time, or was it a slow-motion self-inflicted wound, one bad decision compounding into the next? Drop your take in the comments. And if you enjoyed this deep dive, make sure you're subscribed, because next time, we're breaking down another giant that thought it was untouchable.